Hello everybody, welcome back to ESPN's Football Forecast with myself, James Allcott, and my good friend, fantastic broadcaster, Kweku Afari, joins me to talk about the FA Cup final, but so much more. It is getting a bit chaotic in the world of football, and we thought we'd just got to the end of it. We do have one domestic game to be played, and we're going to talk about it in this video, and the possibility that Erik Ten Hag has finally figured it out tactically, and a new formation could unlock a victory in the FA Cup final against Manchester City. In terms of the end of the season for Man United, Kweku, overall disappointing. Mm-hmm. And actually, if you kind of look at last 10 games, also very disappointing. But the last two games, any kind of hope there? Obviously, 2 victories. But what about the performances?
Well, let's look at who they played against. Brighton, who have been on the beach for the longest time. We've seen De Zerbi now exit. I think the Brighton players would have been aware that he was soon to be out the door. But a good win for Manchester United. They previously lost 4 games in a row against Brighton, so to arrest that record was important for them, and to end the season on a win as well. And like you mentioned, a new formation as well. And that might be the keys to unlocking Manchester United. We've seen a very different Erik Ten Hag in the second half of this season in terms of just going for it. I think this is more aligned to the philosophy and the tactics that he wants to play going forward, which is interesting to see him employ this at this time of the season where he's trying to keep his job. But the result against Brighton, the result against Newcastle stands them in decent stead for a cup final, which they're clearly the underdogs. A second Manchester derby in a row in terms of an FA Cup final. And a game that they know that for Ten Hag, there's everything to play for in terms of winning the trophy and trying to secure his job. But it's a free hit, really. Everyone expects Man City to roll them over. And that's why I think we've seen Man United in recent weeks try different things to maybe not confuse City, but surprise City on the day in terms of their line-up, in terms of who they're going to start. And I expect Manchester United to be competitive, but I think we all have the same team in mind in terms of who's going to win on the weekend.
Interesting point you just brought up there. If Erik Ten Hag wins this trophy, is that him safe and secure for the start of next season?
I don't think that Manchester United should operate under that premise. I think they should have a clear idea in mind in terms of if they're going to continue with Erik Ten Hag or if they're not, and they should have already started to put processes in play in terms of preparing for next season, especially because we're dealing with a summer where there's not only a Euros but the Olympic Games as well, so players aren't going to be with their teams for very long before the start of next season. But I do think in terms of Erik Ten Hag and his security in terms of top level football, winning an FA Cup means that his next job, he can go and show, like, I've won 2 domestic trophies in my 2 seasons at Manchester United. First year, finished 3rd and won the trophy and got to the FA Cup final. Second year, didn't go as well, but finished 8th and won an FA Cup. And
lots of excuses, which he's said numerous times. Exactly. And stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah. And I look at a situation for Chelsea that's relatively similar, apart from the fact that Antonio Conte had more credit in the bank. And Conte's first season at Chelsea, he won the league, got to an FA Cup final, which they lost against Arsenal. In his second season, Chelsea finished 6th, but he won the FA Cup against Manchester United. And that meant when he went to his next job, he's kind of got that on his resume and it's a bit of momentum to build up on. So I think for Ten Hag, this is hugely important. For Man United, this is important as well, because City are asserting their dominance in English football. Of course, charges pending. We don't know what's going to happen with that. But City are by far and away the best team and biggest team in terms of football in England. If Man United can chip away at that in terms of winning the FA Cup, then that'll go some way in terms of restoring Manchester United to where they previously have been.
Yeah, I think there's some elements they need to learn from last year's cup final. Don't concede a goal after 30 seconds might be a good shout. In terms of that formation, that false 9 with Bruno Fernandes, the Brighton game, Højlund didn't even start that game, which I thought was interesting. It's one where I think what he's doing here is, bizarrely, he wanted to kind of evacuate that midfield a lot of the time. But playing Casemiro, when you look at the different apps and you see his rating was incredibly high. He made some amazing tackles in that game. But what he was afforded was some protection. Yeah. And what this new system provides is a lot of bodies in the centre of the pitch. And that, if you look at Arsenal, look at a lot of teams these days, it's one where you're happy for them to go round the side, but they cannot go through the middle. And that has been a very exposing element of Man United over the whole season. So I actually like what he's trying to do here. And I think it allows an opportunity for some undercooked players in terms of like wanting to be where you want to be when it comes to Man United. But in terms of getting Garnacho into the game, getting Diallo, who I'm a massive fan of, I think he should have been starting games much sooner. And of course, Bruno Fernandes, who will have less touches. He only had 41 touches in the game against Brighton, which is not like him at all. He's
What you want,
got
though?
that freedom.
What you want?
He's close to the goal.
Yeah, close to goal. And Bruno Fernandes, in terms of the ability to just kick a football, he might be one of the best players in the world. But in terms of decision making and when he's got a lot of time to think, or when he's that fulcrum of the side and he has to kind of dictate tempo, that's not what I want to see Bruno Fernandes doing. So this formation allows Manchester United to get the best out of Bruno. And on the Ahmad point, I remember coming on here before the Manchester derby in March, and saying that if Man United want to make it compact in the middle, Amad Diallo has to start. And up until that point, it had been all about Garnacho, had been all about Anthony. But we're seeing now that Diallo is not an out-and-out winger. He can play more centrally. We saw him do it in the Championship last season. I think that's bringing a different element out of Manchester United. And so that'll be hugely important to the game on the weekend against Man City, who do normally dominate the middle of the park. Yeah. But if Man United just kind of outnumber them in that position, then they might have a better chance of winning that game.
And also importantly, in terms of the heat maps of those two wide players who are the exciting element for Man United, both of them staying really wide to start with. And it's from that point you then kind of move in and that allows for other runners to play. And also I think Bruno Fernandes, one thing there's been a possibility at hurting the opposition has been a player in that position, in that false nine position, and moving quickly in terms of transition. Once you get the ball, as you say, Man City are going to dominate that game. But even that goal, obviously Rashford scores an absolute thunderbolt in that game, right? But Bruno is able to get himself on the ball and kind of wait for a bit of help, waits for Rashford, and then the goal comes from that. And so I think in a similar vein here, we talk about the risks that he makes, but also the big chances that he creates as well. When he knows he's got those two kind of players who are quick, will drive, have got energy for days in transition from that wide position. That's really hard to defend against when you're a back line of Man City's where you've probably got, you've got that gap in between, but also you've got only a couple of centre-backs back. And also it kind of takes Kyle Walker out of it a little bit, or he certainly has got to follow that runner a lot more when it's Garnacho making those diagonal runs in behind. He was the furthest player forward for Man United in that game against Brighton. So I like the idea of it. It's an acceptance of the fact that you're not going to have the ball all the time, but when you have got it, can you transition quickly? Can you get it to your best players that you've got available? And can you hurt the opposition in behind? And I think it is the best. I don't think it is the answer, but it's their best answer.
Well, it aligns with what Ten Hag said at the beginning of the season. And that's what I'm looking for at Man United, a bit of consistency. Ten Hag said pre-season, we need to be the best transitional team in the world, or one of the best transitional teams in the world. His formation and his tactics at the beginning of the season did not suggest that. This does. And it might be a bit more kamikaze. It might leave them a little bit more open. But this speaks to playing on their strengths and playing on the counter-attack and in transition and being effective when they have the ball and getting their most effective players closer to the goal in Bruno Fernandes. And so it'll be interesting to see if he sticks with that. I just think it's quite difficult as Ten Hag to leave your only recognised striker on the bench for a cup final.
It does feel weird.
It does feel weird. It does feel strange. If he does do it, credit to him for being brave, because you're going to have to do something against this Man City team who have not lost a game since 2023. That was December, at the beginning of December against Aston Villa. They've been in incredible form. Of course, they went out of the Champions League against Real Madrid, but that was a penalty shootout. They're formidable. And we saw how they ended the season in terms of league form. We've seen how they've been in major cup finals against Manchester United in the past. And so Ten Hag's going to have to try and do something to disrupt City, because they are clear favourites going into this one.
Yeah, when it comes to Man City, if you think of the last two games for them, last sort of run-in of games, that three behind Haaland was consistently Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne and Bernardo Silva. Then behind that, you had two different formations when it comes to the Tottenham game and the West Ham game. In the West Ham game, maybe because they knew West Ham were going to kind of sit back, weren't going to have the same amount of bodies in the middle, just Rodri as a sort of single pivot there, and you had Kevin De Bruyne, Phil Foden, Jimmy Doku came in for that one. The game against Tottenham, Kovacic came and played. They played a bit of a double pivot there. How do you see them playing when it comes to this one? We've already spoken about that it's probably going to be a solid amount of bodies there for Man United. Do Man City add another body in there, or do they look to have someone out wide? How do you see it?
I see Jeremy Doku having a big game. I do think he starts this game. He kind of went off the boil a little bit midway through the season after starting really hot. But if you look at the last few games, or especially the last game against West Ham, he's shown what he can do. In the Spurs game, he won the penalty as well. He's a player that's very, very dangerous when he's got a head of steam and he can run at defenders. And I feel like he'll have the opportunity to do that against Manchester United. It's imperative that Man City key players come to the fore. Last season it was Gundogan who came up with the moments for them in an FA Cup final and towards the back end of the season. This year it's been Phil Foden, and Phil Foden did the same thing against Manchester United in the league game where Man City won 3-1, where it was looking like a close game up until the point that he broke it open. And so City, more this season than last season, or more than they had previously, have had to rely on their big players to come to the fore to get them out of trouble, and I feel like that will be the case again. And they've just got more big players who can do big things in big games than Manchester United have. If you look at Kevin De Bruyne, if you look at Phil Foden, if you look at Bernardo Silva, Erling Haaland, it's a myriad of incredible quality. I did see the pictures of them leaving the club on Sunday or Monday morning after winning the league title. They looked worse for wear. Yeah, it looked worse for wear. But they're professionals, and Pep Guardiola can keep them going up until this cup final. So they go into this game as expected favourites. But if Man United can get that first goal, then it creates a completely different problem for Man City.
Stay in the game.
Stay in the game and see if you can keep it close until the last 10, 15 minutes. But I think Man City just have too much quality.
Yeah.
Man United.
I think for me, I think this definitely could be a game for Jack Grealish. I think it's how Phil Foden. I just saw Phil Foden. It's how Pep Guardiola sees that congested area. You're going to have Amrabat sitting in there as well. Kobbie Mainoo will go and help, and they will look to be defensively solid. But you've got Wan-Bissaka who's probably going to play as the right back in this one. So do you want Jeremy Doku who's going to get to that byline, or do you want Grealish to get involved and then have those sort of underlapping runs? I think they might go with Jeremy Doku, and I think actually the important player here is Bernardo Silva, because Bernardo Silva can kind of almost play a bit of a Mazzala role and get in that kind of half space there. And that allows him to do two things. One, kind of get on the edge of that congested centre of the pitch. Also allows Kyle Walker to overlap. But if things aren't kind of working and you want to get control again, he can just go and play as a double pivot to a point with Rodri. And you've got that box of Rodri, Bernardo Silva, Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden. But you've still got that pace of Kyle Walker, who actually, I think we saw it in the West Ham game, bombed on a lot more than we normally see with someone like him. I think you might get to half-time, Man United, with a 0-0, but I think the quality of this Man City side is just above and beyond Man United in every single way. I think it will be comfortable, and I think it will be a 2-0 win for Man City. Score prediction for you? I know you said Man City. What do you think there?
I'm going for 2-0 Man City. Pretty comfortable, though.
Okay, we've both gone for that. What do you think, guys? Let us know in the comments down below.